The clock on the wall of Heritage Kitchen read 5:40 in the afternoon when Maya adjusted her apron for the third time that shift. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from the chill of the air conditioning that hummed despite the humid New York summer, but from the constant sensation of being watched. And she was. The eyes of Henry Thompson, the restaurant manager, seemed to have the supernatural ability to be everywhere at once, measuring every movement, calculating every lost second, and turning the workplace into a minefield of impossible expectations. Maya was 23 years old, and this was only her third day as a waitress. Before this, she had worked at a small clothing boutique in her neighborhood, but the pay barely covered the rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her younger sister. When she saw the "Help Wanted" sign in the window of Heritage Kitchen, she felt it could be the opportunity she had been waiting for. The restaurant was located on Fifth Avenue, a prime area of the city, and the promised pay was nearly double what she earned before. But no one had mentioned the emotional price she would have to pay. Henry Thompson was a tall man with broad shoulders and a perpetually dissatisfied expression. He always wore impeccably pressed dress shirts and shoes that shone as brightly as his temperament was dull. To him, the restaurant wasn't just a place of work. It was a personal empire where every table represented a number, every customer a profit opportunity, and every employee a replaceable gear in the machine that kept the register full. There was no room for sentimentality, for kindness that didn't generate a financial return, or for humanity that couldn't be converted into a tip. That Thursday afternoon, Maya was organizing the silverware at a table that had just been cleared when the front door opened with the soft chime of the bell. She looked up and saw an elderly gentleman slowly entering the dining room. He wore worn-out slacks, a shirt that had once been white but now carried the yellowish tint of time, and patched shoes that told stories of many long walks. His white hair was carefully combed, and his posture, despite his age and simple clothes, maintained a silent dignity that caught Maya's attention. The old man paused for a moment at the entrance, his eyes scanning the room with an expression Maya couldn't quite decipher. There was something there, a mix of nostalgia and recognition, as if this place held memories that transcended a simple visit. He walked slowly to a table near the window, where the intense movement of the avenue was visible, and sat down carefully, like someone occupying a sacred space. Maya approached with the menu in hand and a genuine smile on her face. Unlike Henry, she still believed that everyone who walked through those doors deserved to be treated with respect, regardless of what they wore or how much they could spend. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Heritage Kitchen. Here is our menu," she said, handing him the laminated folder. The old man thanked her with a nod and opened the menu slowly. His eyes, behind simple prescription glasses, scanned the options carefully. Maya noticed that he lingered longer on the more affordable section, the items usually tucked away at the bottom of the list, almost like a reluctant concession to the diversity of customers the restaurant had to serve. "Miss, I'll have the roasted chicken with mashed potatoes and a glass of water, please," he said in a calm, polite voice. Maya noted the order on her handheld device, already feeling the weight of Henry's gaze on her back. She knew what was coming. Before she could even turn around, she heard the manager's deep, impatient voice calling her over with a sharp flick of his hand. Leaving the old man with a polite smile, Maya walked to the counter where Henry was waiting with his arms crossed and a look of disapproval that had become all too familiar in just 3 days. "Maya, how many times do I have to tell you that you need to upsell?" The man ordered the bare minimum. "Did you offer an appetizer? Did you offer dessert? Did you offer any drink other than water?" His voice was low but heavy with restrained irritation. "I just took the order, Mr. Thompson. I can go back and offer more," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's not about being able to. It's about your duty. Every customer who leaves here without spending as much as possible is lost money. And lost money is lost time. And lost time is unacceptable. Get back out there and do your job right," he ordered, already turning away to inspect another table. Maya took a deep breath and returned to the old man's table. He was looking out the window, watching the flow of people rushing by on the sidewalk. There was something deeply lonely in that look, but also a serenity that contrasted with the frantic world outside. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like to start with an appetizer while you wait? We have a very flavorful garlic bread, or perhaps the shrimp cocktail," Maya said, feeling uncomfortable having to push items that were clearly not in the man's budget. The old man turned to her, with a gentle smile that lit up his wrinkled face. "No, thank you, dear. What I ordered is plenty for me, but I appreciate the kindness." Maya nodded and stepped away, but not before noticing that Henry was tracking her every move with that hawk-like gaze that never forgave a mistake. The order was sent to the kitchen, and 20 minutes later she returned with the simple but well-prepared dish. The old man thanked her warmly and began to eat slowly, savoring every bite as if it were the most important meal of his life. Meanwhile, Maya attended to other tables, always under Henry's oppressive watch. Every interaction was monitored, every smile measured, every second timed. The restaurant was reasonably full, with executives closing business deals, couples celebrating small milestones, and groups of friends laughing a bit too loudly for the manager's taste. When the old man finished his meal, Maya brought the check. The amount was modest, one of the smallest tickets the restaurant would record that day. He paid in cash, counting the bills carefully, and left the exact amount, no tip. Maya didn't mind. There was something about that man that inspired respect, not pity. "Thank you, miss. The food was excellent," he said as he stood up. "Thank you, sir." "Please come back and see us," Maya replied sincerely. The old man walked slowly toward the exit, but before crossing the threshold, he turned one last time to look at the dining room. His gaze lingered on the walls decorated with old photographs of the city, the solid wood tables, and the service counter that separated the floor from the kitchen. It was as if he were etching every detail into his memory, or perhaps recognizing ghosts from a distant past. As the door closed behind him, Henry approached Maya with heavy steps. His face was flushed, a combination of repressed anger and accumulated frustration. "Did you see the ticket for that table? $15. 15. He occupied a table for 40 minutes and spent $15. Do you know how much I could have made if a real customer had sat there? At least $60 or $70. You left money on the table, Maya." "Literally," he said, tapping his index finger on the counter to emphasize every word. "He ordered what he wanted and he was polite, Mr. Thompson. I can't force anyone to spend more than they want to," she replied, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. "Of course you can. That's why you're here. To sell, to convince, to turn 15 into 60. If you can't do that, then you're in the wrong place," he snapped before walking away, leaving Maya with a lump in her throat and the certainty that those 3 days of probation were going to be much harder than she imagined. That night, on the crowded subway ride home, Maya thought about the old man. There was something about him that intrigued her, an untold story pulsing behind those tired eyes. She didn't know it yet, but that seemingly insignificant encounter was about to change not only her life, but the fate of everyone who worked at Heritage Kitchen. The next day, Friday, Maya arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, as she always did. She put on her uniform, tied back her hair, and mentally prepared for another day under Henry's authoritarian rule. The rush started early, with the flow of breakfast customers stretching into lunch without a break. It had been nearly 6 hours of nonstop running when, in the middle of the afternoon, the door opened again and the same old man from the day before walked in. Maya felt a spark of joy seeing him, as if his presence brought an unexpected relief in the middle of the chaos. He walked straight to the same table by the window and sat in the exact same chair. Maya approached with the menu, but he gently raised his hand. "No need, dear. I'll have the same as yesterday. Chicken, mashed potatoes, and water." Maya took the order, and before Henry could intercept her, sent it straight to the kitchen. This time, she didn't offer appetizers or desserts. She had realized that respecting this man's choice was more important than meeting the manager's tyrannical expectations. The lunch was served, consumed with the same calm as the day before. and paid for with the same exact amount. When the old man left, Henry was busy resolving a problem in the kitchen and didn't witness the scene. Maya breathed a sigh of relief, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the pattern repeated and the tension rose again. And that is exactly what happened on Saturday. The third consecutive day the old man appeared at Heritage Kitchen was also the day Henry Thompson's patience reached its breaking point. Maya saw the storm brewing from the moment the door opened, and that familiar figure crossed the floor toward his usual table. It was Saturday, the busiest day for the restaurant, when entire families came to celebrate special occasions and groups of friends gathered for long conversations over wine and laughter. Every occupied table represented a valuable revenue opportunity, and Henry was mentally calculating the potential profit of every minute. Seeing that window table, one of the most requested because it offered the best view of the avenue, being occupied by the same man who spent only $15 and stayed for nearly an hour, was like a personal insult to him. Maya handed the order to the kitchen for the third time in 3 days. Chicken, potatoes, water. The routine was setting in, and she realized she was beginning to form a silent bond with this mysterious customer. They didn't exchange many words beyond the order, but there was a tacit connection of mutual respect that went beyond the traditional commercial relationship. The old man ate slowly, chewing every bite with focus, as if each forkful were a meditation. Between bites, his eyes wandered over the restaurant walls. Maya noticed he lingered especially on the framed photographs decorating the room. They were old images of the city, black and white records of a world that no longer existed, with trolleys on the streets and people dressed in the formality of decades past. There were also some more recent photos showing the evolution of the restaurant itself. One in particular caught her eye: the grand opening of Heritage Kitchen 15 years ago. In the image, a young man no older than 30 smiled proudly next to a banner announcing the opening. His eyes shone with an enthusiasm that contrasted sharply with the tired but satisfied expression he wore these days. That was Robert Miller, the owner of the restaurant, a man who rarely appeared on the floor, preferring to handle the administrative side from an office upstairs. The old man looked at that photo with an intensity Maya couldn't understand. There was something there, a contained emotion flickering in the corner of his eyes, an untold story pulsing in the silence of his observation. Henry appeared beside Maya like a threatening shadow. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there, arms crossed over his chest, watching the old man with an expression of disdain and impatience. Maya felt her body stiffen. She knew this confrontation was inevitable. She just didn't imagine it would happen so publicly. 3 days, Maya. 3 days in a row, occupying the best table in the house to spend $15. Do you know how much I'm losing because of this? Do you know how many real customers I've had to seat at worse tables because this one was taken? Henry's voice was low but laced with venom. He's a customer like any other, Mr. Thompson. He's paying for what he consumes, Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the nervousness rising in her chest. Customer? That man is an obstacle to business. Look at his clothes. Look at the way he eats, chewing slowly, making every bite last an eternity. He's here because he has nowhere else to go, not because he wants to eat. And I won't accept my restaurant turning into a shelter, Henry said, his voice beginning to rise. Maya felt the heat rush to her face. Please, Mr. Thompson, let's discuss this away from the customers. It's not appropriate. You know what's not appropriate? Having an employee who doesn't understand the basics of how a business works. Your job isn't to be a social worker, it's to generate profit, and you are failing miserably at it. Before Maya could respond, Henry was already walking toward the old man's table. His steps were firm, decided, carrying an authority that accepted no challenge. Maya's heart raced. She looked around and realized other customers were starting to notice, the volume of conversation dropping as eyes turned toward the scene about to unfold. The old man was chewing peacefully when Henry stopped. Beside his table, looming over him at his full, imposing height. The contrast was jarring. On one side, a tall, well-dressed man radiating power and arrogance. On the other, a man bent by time, wearing simple clothes, eating a modest meal in peace. Sir, I need you to finish your meal and vacate the table, Henry said bluntly. his voice echoing through the now silent room. The old man looked up slowly, without haste, and met the manager's gaze with a serene expression that showed neither surprise nor fear. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "You heard me. This is a restaurant, not a lounge. For the last 3 days, you've occupied this table for an hour while spending the bare minimum. That is not acceptable. I'm asking you to leave now." A murmur ran through the surrounding tables. Some customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others looked down at their plates, embarrassed to witness such public humiliation. Maya felt her legs shake, but something inside her, a strength she didn't know she possessed, began to emerge. "I paid for the food I consumed," the old man said with dignity. "I don't owe anyone anything. Paying $15 doesn't give you the right to treat the best table in the restaurant like your living room. We have customers who spend 10, 15 times that and sometimes can't even get this table because it's occupied. You are hurting my business." Maya saw the old man's hand tremble slightly as he held his fork. It wasn't fear, she realized, but a deeper emotion, an old pain being reopened. The man closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength, or perhaps memories, to face the situation. "Mr. Thompson, please, this isn't necessary," Maya heard her own voice say, surprised by the firmness she managed to find. Henry turned to her with blazing eyes. "You are dismissed, Maya. Go to the break room. I'll handle this." "No," she replied, feeling as if someone else had taken control of her body. "I won't let you humiliate a customer like this." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to stop. Henry took 2 steps toward Maya, his face red with suppressed rage. "Excuse me? Are you disobeying me? I am defending the dignity of a person who is being treated unfairly. He isn't doing anything wrong. He paid for his food. He's eating quietly." "The problem isn't him, Mr. Thompson. The problem is that you only see numbers, not people." The words poured out of Maya like a flood that had been dammed up for too long. She knew she was crossing a line of no return, that this act of courage would cost her her job, but she couldn't stay silent in the face of such injustice. Henry took a deep breath, trying to control the fury threatening to explode. When he spoke, his voice was ice cold, every word pronounced with surgical precision. "Get your things. You're fired." Maya felt the impact of the words like a punch to the gut. 3 days of work, the hope of a better paycheck, the chance to help her sister with the bills, all crumbling in an instant. But when she looked at the old man, she saw something in his eyes that made all the fear worth it. It was gratitude, pure and simple, mixed with a profound sadness. "Fine," Maya said, taking off her apron and placing it on the counter. "But you should be ashamed. This place might have financial success. The tables might always be full, but it has lost its soul. And a business without a soul doesn't last forever." She walked toward the break room with her head held high, ignoring the stares of the customers and co-workers watching in silence. Her hands shook as she opened her locker and grabbed her bag, but there was also a strange sense of lightness, as if she had been freed from a weight she didn't even know she was carrying. When she returned to the floor to leave through the main door, she saw the old man was still sitting at the table, but he was no longer eating. He was looking out the window with that distant expression, his shoulders slightly slumped, a figure of solitude in the middle of the crowded restaurant. Maya wanted to go over, to say a word of goodbye, but she felt it would be intrusive. She nodded from a distance, and he returned it with a slight smile that carried decades of untold stories. The door closed behind her, and Maya found herself on the busy sidewalk of Fifth Avenue on a Saturday afternoon, unemployed and not knowing how she would pay next month's rent. But strangely, she didn't regret it. There was something bigger at stake. In that situation, something that transcended the immediate need for financial survival. Inside the restaurant, Henry returned to the counter with heavy steps, satisfied with having solved 2 problems at once: getting rid of the inconvenient customer and the insubordinate employee. He didn't notice that, in a discreet corner of the room, a middle-aged man was watching everything with growing concern. It was Marcus, the assistant manager, a longtime employee who had worked there since the opening. Unlike Henry, Marcus knew the full history of Heritage Kitchen. He knew how Robert Miller had started. He knew the struggles and sacrifices it had taken to build this business. And something about that entire scene caused him deep discomfort, a feeling that something very wrong had just happened. The old man remained seated for a few more minutes, not touching the food left on his plate. Finally, he stood up slowly, left the exact change on the table, and walked toward the exit. But before leaving, he stopped in front of the grand opening photograph and stood there, motionless, for long seconds. His right hand rose as if to touch the glass of the frame, but stopped in mid-air, trembling slightly. Marcus watched from a distance, sensing that something deeply significant was happening, but unable to connect the dots. When the old man finally left, the assistant manager made a decision. He needed to talk to Robert Miller. He needed to tell him what had happened. There was something about this whole story that didn't fit, a missing piece in a puzzle he couldn't yet see. Robert Miller was in his second-floor office, focused on cost spreadsheets and revenue projections, when the urgent knock on the door interrupted his calculations. He looked up from his computer and saw Marcus enter without waiting for permission, something unusual for the always respectful and cautious assistant manager. "Robert, we need to talk." "Now," Marcus said, closing the door carefully behind him. Robert leaned back in his chair, noting the worried expression on the face of the man he considered not just an employee but almost a brother. Marcus had been there since day one. He had helped choose the tables, define the menu, and train the first team. He knew every corner of this place, every story kept within these walls. "What happened?" Robert asked, feeling a pang of apprehension. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down, taking a deep breath before beginning to recount the afternoon's events. He spoke about the old man who had been coming for 3 days straight, always ordering the same simple dish, always occupying the table by the window. He told him about Henry's growing tension, the public humiliation, Maya's courage in defending the customer, and the summary firing that followed. As he listened, Robert felt the blood turn to ice in his veins. There was something in that story that echoed in deep places in his memory, places he had carefully locked away years ago to move forward, without the weight of nostalgia. "Describe the man to me," Robert asked, his voice suddenly tense. Marcus frowned, surprised by the reaction. White hair, well-combed, simple glasses. He must be 70, maybe 75. Thin, bent by time. Very simple clothes, worn out, but clean. And he had a way of looking at the restaurant, Robert, like he knew every detail, every photo on the wall, especially the one from the opening. He stood in front of it for a long time before he left. Robert felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. His hands began to shake, and he had to rest them on the desk to hide the tremor. It couldn't be. After all these years, it couldn't be him. "Where is that man now?" he managed to ask. "He left about 20 minutes ago. Henry practically chased him out of the restaurant." Robert stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair in the process. His face was pale, and Marcus had never seen him like this, oscillating between shock and something that looked like despair. "Why would he leave? Why didn't he come up to talk to me?" Robert whispered, more to himself than to Marcus. "Do you know this man?" the assistant manager asked, starting to connect the dots. Robert didn't answer immediately. He walked to the office window overlooking the avenue and watched the flow of people passing below, searching uselessly for a figure that must be long gone. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "If it's who I think it is, Marcus, then Henry just kicked out the only person in this world to whom I owe absolutely everything." The words hung in the air for a few seconds before Marcus could fully process their meaning. Robert turned back to the assistant manager, and for the first time in 15 years of partnership, Marcus saw tears glistening in his boss's eyes. "Sit down. I need to tell you a story I've never told anyone." Robert returned to his chair, which Marcus had picked up from the floor, and began to narrate. His voice was low, as if he were unearthing memories he had buried deep. 18 years ago, I was nothing. I worked as a kitchen prep at a small diner in Brooklyn. I made peanuts, lived in a rented room that barely fit a bed. But I had a dream. I wanted my own place, a real restaurant where I could create my own dishes and welcome people my way. It was an impossible dream for someone in my position. No money, no connections, nothing but will. Robert paused, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the past. That's when I met Mr. Arthur. He was a regular at the diner where I worked. He came in often, ordered simple meals, but always complimented the food. One day, we got to talking. I was cleaning the tables after my shift, and he was the last customer. Don't know why, but I started talking about my dream. I told him everything. The restaurant I wanted to open, the food I wanted to serve, the atmosphere I wanted to create. He listened with focus, without interrupting me once. Marcus was completely absorbed in the story. Robert continued, his voice starting to crack. 2 weeks later, Mr. Arthur came back to the diner. He asked to talk to me when my shift ended. He said he had thought a lot about our conversation. He said he saw something in me that reminded him of when he was young and full of dreams. And then, Marcus, he did something that changed my life forever. Robert had to stop for a moment, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He handed me an envelope. Inside was $80,000, every penny he had saved during a lifetime of working as a bus driver. He said that was for me to open my restaurant. He said he didn't want anything in return. No partnership, no percentage. He didn't even want me to pay it back. He just wanted me to realize my dream because, according to him, giving someone a chance was the only wealth that really mattered in life. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in a terrifying way. I tried to refuse, of course. How could I accept a lifetime of savings from a man I barely knew? But he was adamant. He said his life was already complete. He had no family, and that money sitting in a bank account made no difference. But transformed into a dream realized, it would have an eternal meaning. I accepted on the condition that when the restaurant was running, I would hire him to work with me, so we could have a real partnership. He just smiled and said he'd think about it. Robert stood up again, unable to stay seated as the emotions overflowed. I used every cent of that money to open Heritage Kitchen. This place exists because of him. Every table, every plate, every brick of this building was possible because of Mr. Arthur's generosity. And do you know what happened after I opened the doors? Marcus shook his head, completely gripped by the narrative. He disappeared. Literally. I went back to the diner where I used to work to thank him personally, to invite him to the opening. But they told me he had moved without leaving an address. I looked for him for months. I tried every way I knew, but it was like he had evaporated. Over time, I convinced myself he had done it on purpose, that he didn't want to create a sense of eternal debt. And I learned to live with that absence, keeping the gratitude in my heart, but moving forward. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with the weight of that revelation. Marcus finally understood the magnitude of what he had witnessed on the floor minutes ago. "And you think that old man was him?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The description fits perfectly, and the way he looked at the photos, especially the one from the opening. He was checking to see if his investment had worked, Marcus. He was seeing what his sacrifice built, and instead of being received like a king, he was humiliated and kicked out by my manager. The anger in Robert's voice was palpable. He picked up the internal phone and dialed the floor. When someone answered, his voice was ice cold. "Tell Henry to come to my office immediately." While they waited, Robert paced the office like a caged animal. Marcus could see he was struggling to control his emotions, not to let the fury dominate him completely before having the necessary conversation. The door opened 5 minutes later, and Henry entered with his usual posture of confidence, unaware of the storm about to break over him. "You called for me, Robert?" he said, using his boss's first name with the familiarity of someone who considers himself indispensable. Robert turned slowly, and Henry finally realized something was very wrong. The Expression on the restaurant owner's face was one of contained fury he had never seen before. "Tell me about the incident with the elderly man on the floor today," Robert said, every word pronounced with icy precision. Henry hesitated, sensing danger but not yet understanding its nature. "Oh, that. A man who had been coming for 3 days, taking up our best table to spend $15. He was hurting the business. I had to be firm and ask him to leave. It's part of my job to maximize the establishment's profit." "Maximize the profit," Robert repeated, his voice rising slightly. "And that's why you publicly humiliated a customer? That's why you kicked out a man who was paying for his meal? That's why you fired an employee who had the courage to defend human dignity?" Henry began to back away, realizing he had made a grave mistake, but still not understanding the extent of his failure. "Robert, I was just," he started to say, but was cut off. "You weren't just anything. You turned my restaurant into a cold money-making machine. You forgot that before we are a business, we are a place where people come not just to eat, but to be treated with respect and dignity. You violated the fundamental values this place was built on." Robert took a deep breath, trying to regain some control. "That man you kicked out, Henry, wasn't just any customer. He is the reason this restaurant exists. Every cent you're so worried about maximizing exists because he, one day, believed in me when no one else did, and you treated him like trash." The color drained from Henry's face. "Robert, I didn't know. How could I have known?" "Exactly. You didn't know because you never bothered to know people's stories. To you, everyone is just a number on a spreadsheet. Well, Henry, you're fired. Pack your things and get out of my restaurant." Henry stumbled out of the office, his face livid and his hands shaking. All the arrogance that characterized him had evaporated, replaced by profound shock. Marcus watched him pass through the hallway in silence, feeling no pity. Some lessons can only be learned through pain, and Henry had just received the hardest one of his career. When the door closed, Robert collapsed into his chair, covering his face with his hands. The anger had given way to deep sadness. After all these years, Mr. Arthur had returned, and instead of a celebratory reunion, he had witnessed the worst side of the establishment he had helped create. "I need to find him," Robert whispered. "I need to ask for forgiveness and thank him properly." Marcus approached, placing a comforting hand on his boss's shoulder. "And the waitress?" "Maya, if I'm not mistaken. She lost her job defending Mr. Arthur. That also needs to be corrected." Robert looked up, a flash of determination cutting through the sadness. "You're right. Absolutely right. She showed more character in 3 days of work than Henry did in 3 years. Do you have her address? It should be in her hiring file in HR. I'll go get it." As Marcus left, Robert stood up and walked to a locked drawer in his desk. From there, he pulled out a small wooden box he hadn't opened in years. Inside, he kept some old photographs, including one of a middle-aged man smiling next to a bus. It was Mr. Arthur in his bus-driving days, the photo he had given Robert the day he handed over the envelope with his savings. Robert held the photograph carefully, as if it were made of crystal. The man in the image had dark hair, an upright posture, and bright eyes full of vitality. Compared to the description Marcus had given of the old man in the restaurant, they were almost 2 different people. Time had taken its toll, but Robert knew the essence of that generous man remained intact. The proof was in how he returned to the restaurant, not to claim recognition, but simply to discreetly observe the fruit of his generosity. Marcus returned minutes later with a folder. "I have the address. She lives in Astoria, Queens. Shares an apartment with her sister." Robert took the paper with the information and put it in his pocket. "I'm going there now. I need to fix this personally. And Mr. Arthur? How will we find him?" Robert was thoughtful for a moment. He came 3 days in a row, always at the same time. "There's a chance he'll come back tomorrow. I'll be on the floor waiting. And if he doesn't show up, I'll look for him in every corner of this city until I find him." An hour later, Robert parked his car in front of a modest building in Astoria. The building had 5 floors, peeling paint, and a sign in the lobby announcing that the intercom was broken. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, counting the numbers on the doors until he found apartment 307. He took a deep breath before knocking. He heard movement on the other side, and then the door opened, revealing Maya. She was still wearing the same clothes she had on when she left the restaurant hours ago, but her eyes were red, a sign she had been crying. When she saw Robert, her expression went through several stages of emotion in a few seconds: surprise, confusion, embarrassment, and finally a natural defensiveness. "Mr. Miller? What are you doing here? Can I come in? I need to talk to you." Maya hesitated but eventually stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small and simple but clean and organized. A young girl who looked about 15 was sitting on the sofa doing homework. She looked up curiously at the visitor. "Julia, this is my sister," Maya introduced. "Julia, go to the bedroom, please." The girl gathered her notebooks and left, but not before casting one last curious look at Robert. When they were alone, Maya crossed her arms, assuming a defensive posture. "If you came to make me sign something related to the firing, you don't have to. I understand how it works. 3 days was still the probation period. I won't cause any trouble." Robert shook his head, feeling a pang of shame. "Maya, I came here to ask for your forgiveness and to offer you your job back. Actually, I came to offer you much more than that." Maya blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Robert pointed to the sofa. "Can we sit? I have a lot to explain." Over the next few minutes, Robert told Maya the whole story. He spoke about Mr. Arthur, the sacrifice he had made, and how Heritage Kitchen existed because of that man's generosity. He explained that he had only discovered everything hours ago through Marcus's account, and that Henry's firing had been immediate. Maya listened in silence, her eyes widening as she understood the magnitude of what she had witnessed. When Robert finished, she remained silent for a long moment. "So that gentleman was your benefactor, and I didn't even know," she whispered. "I just felt it was wrong to treat him that way. Anyone deserves respect, regardless of what they spend. And it was exactly that attitude that showed me who you really are, Sarah. In 3 days, you've demonstrated more integrity than some employees who have been with me for years. You put human dignity above your job security. That is rare and precious." Robert straightened up on the sofa, looking her directly in the eyes. "I want you to come back to the restaurant, but not as a waitress. I want you to be my executive assistant. You're going to learn every aspect of the business with me. You'll help me rebuild the culture of Hearth and Heritage, to bring back the values that were lost while I was too focused on spreadsheets and not spending enough time on the floor." Sarah was visibly shaken. "Mr. Miller, I don't have any administrative experience. I barely finished high school. I'm taking night classes, but I'm only in my 1st semester. And Mr. Arthur was a bus driver with no business background, yet he still had the wisdom to invest in human potential. I'm not looking for a degree, Sarah. I'm looking for character, and you have plenty of that." Tears began to roll down Sarah's face. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. Robert waited patiently, understanding that she needed to process the massive turnaround her life had just taken. "And my sister," she finally managed to say. "Julie, she needs me. I can't let her go without anything. The salary I'm going to offer will ensure you can take proper care of her. And more, I'm going to pay for your college, any course you want to take, at any institution. Consider it an investment in the restaurant's future, and also my way of honoring Mr. Arthur's legacy. He invested in me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to do the same." Sarah couldn't stop crying. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. Just a few hours ago, she was unemployed and desperate. Now she had an opportunity that would completely change her life's trajectory. "I accept," she said through sobs. "I'll work so hard. I'll prove you made the right choice." "I know you will," Robert replied with a genuine smile. "But first, we have a more important mission. We need to find Mr. Arthur. He might come back to the restaurant tomorrow, but I can't risk losing this chance. Do you remember any detail that could help us locate him? Sarah thought for a moment, wiping away her tears. He was always looking at the old photographs, especially the one from the grand opening. And once I heard him mutter something about how everything had changed so much. But some things remained the same. I don't know if that helps. Robert grew thoughtful. Tomorrow is Sunday. I'm going to spend the whole day at the restaurant. If he shows up, I'll be there. And you too, if you want. I think he'd be happy to know what came of your courage. Sarah nodded emphatically. I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for anything. When Robert left the apartment, he felt lighter despite the anxiety. He had corrected an injustice and given a well-deserved opportunity to someone who had shown values aligned with his own. But the most important mission was still pending, finding the man who had changed his life and who now, after all these years, deserved to know that his sacrifice had been worth it. That night, Robert could hardly sleep. His mind drifted between memories of the past and expectations for the future. He remembered the conversation he had with Mr. Arthur 18 years ago, how the man had listened to him with genuine attention, without judgment or condescension. There was a wisdom in that bus driver that transcended any formal education, a deep understanding of what truly mattered in life. And now, after all this time, he had returned. But why? What had motivated him to come back at this exact moment? Was it just nostalgia? Or was there something more? Something Robert hadn't fully understood yet. The questions kept him awake until the early hours of the morning. When he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of the restaurant's opening, of the empty tables waiting to be filled, of the hope pulsing in his chest on that first day. And in the dream, Mr. Arthur was there, smiling proudly from a corner, watching everything in silence. When Robert woke up on Sunday morning, the sun hadn't fully risen. He dressed quickly and drove to the restaurant, even knowing it wouldn't open until noon. He needed to be there, prepared, waiting. Mark had offered to join him and was already at the door when Robert arrived. "Any news?" Mark asked. "None. But I have faith he'll come." They entered the silent restaurant, and Robert walked to the table near the window, the one Mr. Arthur had chosen during his 3 days of visits. He sat there, feeling the texture of the wood under his hands, looking out the window at the still empty avenue on that Sunday morning. And there he stayed, waiting for the miracle of a reunion that was 18 years overdue. Hearth and Heritage opened its doors at noon that Sunday, but Robert had already been there for hours, sitting at the table by the window, his eyes fixed on the entrance. Mark discreetly supervised the staff, ensuring everything ran perfectly while the boss kept his silent vigil. Sarah arrived 15 minutes before opening, wearing a simple but elegant outfit. There was a mix of nervousness and determination in her eyes. Robert signaled for her to come over and pointed to the chair beside him. "He hasn't shown up yet," he said, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. "He will," Sarah replied with a conviction he wished he shared. "I'm sure of it." The first few hours were agonizing. Families walked in. Couples settled down. Groups of friends filled the room with laughter and lively conversation. Every time the door opened, Robert felt his heart race, only to slow down again when he saw it wasn't the figure he was expecting. 2 hours passed. 3. 4. The lunch rush peaked and began to fade. Robert felt hope slipping through his fingers like sand, but he refused to give up. Mark approached a few times to suggest he eat something, but Robert just shook his head, keeping his eyes fixed on the entrance. It was almost 4 in the afternoon when Sarah touched his arm gently. "Mr. Miller, look." Robert followed her gaze and felt the air leave his lungs. There he was, standing in the doorway, the same figure bent by time, the same simple clothes, the same eyes that carried decades of stories. Mr. Arthur had returned. For a long moment, the two men simply looked at each other across the room. The restaurant continued its normal bustle around them, but for Robert and Mr. Arthur, it was as if time had stopped. 18 years of distance evaporated in that instant, leaving only the young dreamer and the generous man who had believed in him. Robert stood up slowly, his legs trembling. He began walking toward the door and saw that Mr. Arthur was doing the same. They met in the middle of the dining room, and only then did Robert realize he was crying. "Mr. Arthur," he whispered, his voice breaking. "After all these years." The old man smiled, and in that smile, Robert recognized the same kindness, the same quiet wisdom he had known decades ago. Time had marked his face and hunched his shoulders, but it hadn't touched his essence. "Robert," Mr. Arthur said, his voice weaker than Robert remembered, but still carrying that warm tone. "You've built something beautiful, far beyond what I imagined when I handed you that envelope." Robert couldn't stop crying. Without thinking, he hugged the elderly man carefully, feeling how fragile he had become. It was like hugging his own roots, the invisible foundation upon which his entire life had been built. "Why did you disappear?" he managed to ask when they finally pulled apart. "I looked for you for years. I wanted to thank you. I wanted you to see what we created together." Mr. Arthur made a tired gesture. "Let's sit, Robert. I don't have the energy I used to." Robert guided him back to the table near the window. The one he now understood held a much greater meaning than he had imagined. Sarah had discreetly stepped back, giving space for the reunion, but she watched from a distance with tears in her eyes. Mark also watched, moved, finally witnessing the full story he had heard the day before. When they were seated, Mr. Arthur looked around the restaurant with that expression Sarah had noticed in the previous days, a mix of pride, nostalgia, and something deeper that Robert was beginning to identify as a farewell. "I disappeared because I didn't want you to feel indebted to me," Mr. Arthur began. "That money was my gift to the future, not a loan or an investment. If I stayed around, you would have spent energy trying to pay me back instead of focusing on building your dream. I didn't want that. But I wanted you to be a part of it," Robert protested. "I wanted you to work with me, to see what you planted grow. And I did see it, my son. You have no idea how many times I passed by here over the years, looking through the window, seeing the place full, hearing the laughter. That was enough for me." Robert felt a tightening in his chest. Then why come back now? Why come inside after all this time? Mr. Arthur was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the wooden table. When he spoke, his voice was even lower. "Because I'm tired, Robert. Very tired. My health isn't good. The doctors are talking about months, not years. And before I go, I needed to be sure of one thing." Robert felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "No," he whispered. "It can't be. Time comes for us all," Mr. Arthur said with serenity. "I'm not afraid. I've lived a good life, simple but honest. But I had a concern. I needed to know if the place I helped create still had a soul, or if it had become just another cold business focused only on profit." "That's why you came 3 days in a row," Robert realized. "You were testing the restaurant." Mr. Arthur nodded. "And I almost left convinced that I had failed, that my sacrifice had created just another money-making machine. That manager? He looked at me as if I were less than human, just a number that didn't generate enough return." Robert covered his face with his hands, the shame and anger returning in full force. "I am so sorry, so much. Henry has been fired. He should never have treated you or anyone that way." "But then something happened that changed everything," Mr. Arthur continued, his eyes turning to where Sarah was watching from a distance. "That young woman, she defended me. She risked her job, her survival, to protect the dignity of a stranger. And in that moment, I knew that all was not lost, that there was still humanity here." Robert followed his gaze and signaled for Sarah to come closer. She came over hesitantly, wiping away the tears that were flowing freely down her face. "Mr. Arthur, this is Sarah. And Sarah, this is the man who made all of this possible." Sarah reached out her hand, but Mr. Arthur pulled her into a hug. "Thank you, my dear. You gave me back my faith." When they pulled apart, Robert held Mr. Arthur's hand, feeling how thin and fragile it had become. "Let me take care of you," Anything you need. Medical treatment. A place to stay, whatever it is. Please. Mr. Arthur smiled, squeezing Robert's hand with the little strength he still had. I don't need anything material, my son. My apartment is simple but enough. And as for the treatments, I'm already at peace with what's coming. But there is indeed something you can do for me. Anything, Robert said immediately. The old man looked around the restaurant once more, his eyes lingering on the photographs, the tables full of families, the movement that represented life and human connection. I want to leave a legacy, not in my name, but in the spirit of what I did for you. There are so many young people out there with impossible dreams, with potential stifled by a lack of opportunity. I want you to use part of the success this place has achieved to give them the same chance I gave you. Robert felt the tears return. How? Mr. Arthur pulled an envelope yellowed by time from his pocket. Inside were documents. I have some savings left. It's not much, but added to what you can contribute, it would be enough to start a fund. A fund that grants opportunities to entrepreneurs who just need an initial chance. No bureaucracy, no interest, no requirement for return. Just the same thing I gave you. Trust and an opportunity. Robert took the documents with trembling hands. I'll do it. More than that, I'll turn it into something big. I'll ensure your name, your legacy, your generosity continue to inspire people long after we're all gone. Mr. Arthur shook his head slightly. Don't put my name on it. Call it the Second Chance Fund or something like that. What matters isn't who gave, but who receives. That is the true lesson. Sarah watched the scene with a heavy heart. There was a transfer of legacy happening, a cycle closing and another opening, and somehow she knew she was part of it all. I'll help you run it, she said suddenly. If you'll let me, I want to be part of this project. Robert and Mr. Arthur looked at her and both smiled at the same time. It would be perfect, Robert said. Sarah will be my executive assistant. Together, we'll ensure your legacy lives on. Mr. Arthur leaned back in his chair, an expression of deep peace taking over his face. Then I can go in peace, knowing that what I planted will continue to bear fruit, that other young people will get the chances they deserve. It's all I could ask for. Robert squeezed his hand tighter. Don't talk about going yet. We have time. Let's spend this time together. I want to hear all your stories. I want you to know every corner of this place that exists because of you. Mark approached then, carrying a tray with a carefully prepared meal. Excuse me, Mr. Arthur. The chef prepared our best dish for you. On the house, of course. And it will always be that way. Mr. Arthur looked at the elaborate plate, so different from the simple meals he had ordered in the previous days. His eyes filled with tears. You don't have to do this. But we want to, Robert said. And from now on, this table is yours. Whenever you want to come, it will be reserved and waiting for you. The months following the reunion were the most significant in the history of Hearth and Heritage. Robert kept his promise and spent as much time as possible by Mr. Arthur's side, listening to stories of a life lived simply, but full of wisdom. The old man became a constant presence at the restaurant, no longer as a lonely customer paying for the cheapest dish, but as part of the soul of the place. Sarah took on her new role with impressive dedication. She worked side by side with Robert, learning not just about administration and management, but about something much more important: how to keep humanity at the center of a business. She organized the documentation for the Second Chance Fund, researched young entrepreneurs who needed support, and became the bridge between Mr. Arthur's legacy and the future being built. The first beneficiary of the fund was a young woman named Beatrice, who dreamed of opening a small bakery, but had no startup capital. When Sarah and Robert handed her the check, no bureaucracy, no interest, no repayment required, she cried the same way Robert had cried 18 years earlier. The cycle of generosity was perpetuating itself. Mr. Arthur was present at that simple ceremony, held at a restaurant table after hours. He held Beatrice's hands with his increasingly fragile strength and said the same words he had said to Robert years ago. Use this to build your dream. And when you succeed, remember to help someone else. That is the only payback that matters. But while the project flourished, Mr. Arthur's health declined. Robert noticed with every visit how he was thinner, more tired, walking with more difficulty. He offered countless times to pay for more aggressive treatments, private doctors, anything that could prolong that precious life. Mr. Arthur always refused gently. I've lived longer than I deserved, he would say. And these last few months, seeing the fruit of what I planted, are worth entire years. I'm at peace, Robert. It was on a rainy April afternoon that Mr. Arthur appeared at the restaurant for the last time. Robert noticed immediately that something was different. The old man was paler than usual, his movements even slower. But there was also a special serenity in his gaze, as if he carried a deep certainty about something important. They sat at their usual table, the one near the window that now had a small, discreet plaque, reserved for Mr. Arthur, the silent founder. I came to say goodbye, Mr. Arthur said bluntly. I feel it's time. Robert felt the world crumble around him. No, not yet. We have so much time ahead of us. Mr. Arthur smiled tenderly. No one controls when it's time, my son. But I came here because I need to tell you something important. One last lesson, if you'll have it. Robert held his hand, unable to speak, only nodding. Throughout my life, I accumulated very little in material terms. I was a bus driver. I lived in simple apartments. I never had luxuries. But do you know what I discovered? True wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you give. Every penny I saved over. The years didn't bring me a tenth of the joy I felt handing that envelope to you. And now, seeing not just your success, but how you are using that success to help others, I feel my life had a purpose that transcends my individual existence. Tears flowed freely down Robert's face. You changed my life completely. I would be nothing without you. And you gave meaning to mine, Mr. Arthur replied. But now I need you to promise me one thing, anything. Don't let this place lose its soul. Success is important. Profit is necessary. But never allow numbers to become more important than people. Every customer who walks in here is someone with a story, with dreams, with struggles. Treat everyone with the dignity that young Waitress treated me with when I needed it most. That is the essence of what we built together. I promise, Robert said, his voice choked with emotion. I will honor your legacy every day. I will ensure that every person who walks in here is seen, respected, and valued. Mr. Arthur looked out the window one last time, watching the rain wash the avenue. What a beautiful place you've built, Robert. I'm proud to have been a part of it. Sarah arrived at that moment, having been called by Mark, who had realized the gravity of the situation. She sat beside Mr. Arthur and held his other hand. Thank you, my dear, he said to her. Thank you for reminding me that genuine kindness still exists in the world. The gratitude is mine, Mr. Arthur, Sarah replied. You taught me that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it seems costly. They stayed there for hours, the three of them, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. When the rain finally stopped and the sun began to set, tinting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Mr. Arthur stood up slowly. It's time to go home. Robert insisted on driving him. In the car, during the trip to the modest apartment where Mr. Arthur lived, the silence was punctuated only by the old man's labored breathing. When they arrived, Robert helped him up the stairs, feeling how every step required an immense effort from that fragile body. At the apartment door, they hugged one last time. See you soon, Robert said, refusing to say goodbye. See you always, Mr. Arthur, corrected with a smile. Because what we built together will last forever. 3 days later, Robert received the call he had feared. Mr. Arthur had passed away in his sleep, peacefully, without pain. The building superintendent had found a letter addressed to Robert on the living room table. With trembling hands, Robert opened the envelope and read the words written in the shaky but careful handwriting of the man who had changed his life. Dear Robert, if you are reading this, then I have completed my journey. Do not be sad. I lived exactly the life I wanted to live, and died knowing I made a difference. You were my greatest pride, not just for the success you achieved, but for the man you became. Keep planting opportunities. Keep believing in people. Keep remembering that a man's true value is not measured by what he accumulates, but by what he gives. With all my love and eternal gratitude, Arthur. Robert read and reread the letter countless times, memorizing every word. And then he made a decision. Hearth and Heritage closed for one day to honor the man who was its true founder. Robert organized a simple but moving ceremony at the restaurant itself. There were no expensive flowers or elaborate speeches, just people whose lives had been touched by Mr. Arthur, directly or indirectly. Mark spoke about the lesson in humility he had learned upon hearing the restaurant's true history. Sarah shared how the courage to defend a stranger had completely changed her life. Beatrice, the first beneficiary of the Second Chance Fund, told how that opportunity had given her hope when everything seemed impossible. And Robert, finally, revealed the full story publicly. He told of the young kitchen hand he was 18 years ago, of the bus driver who believed in him, of the $80,000 that represented a lifetime of savings. He spoke of the values Mr. Arthur embodied, and that would now become the permanent pillars of the restaurant. From that day on, Hearth and Heritage was transformed. The table near the window was never again occupied by regular customers. It became a living memorial, with Mr. Arthur's photograph in a simple frame and a plaque that briefly told his story. But more than that, that table began to be offered for free once a week to people in vulnerable situations. Anyone who needed a dignified meal and a moment of respect could sit there and be treated as the most important customer in the establishment. Sarah officially became the general manager, bringing a new philosophy to the team. Every employee was trained not just in service techniques, but in human values. Mr. Arthur's story became part of the onboarding for new hires, reminding everyone that they didn't just work in a simple restaurant, but in a place with a soul and a purpose. The Second Chance Fund grew exponentially, with part of the restaurant's profits being directed toward it and donations from customers inspired by the story. Dozens of young entrepreneurs received their opportunities. Each of them was personally mentored by Sarah and Robert, who offered not just capital, but guidance, emotional support, and the certainty that someone believed in them. 1 year after Mr. Arthur's passing, Robert was at the restaurant on a Sunday afternoon when an elderly woman entered timidly. She looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the elegance of the environment. Robert greeted her personally. "Welcome. How can I help you?" The woman hesitated before speaking. "Sorry to bother you. My name is Mrs. Connie. I was a neighbor of Arthur's, the gentleman who used to come here. He spoke a lot about this place in his final months. He said that here he had found proof that kindness still exists in the world. I just came to see it and to thank you for treating my friend with such care." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "You aren't bothering us at all. In fact, I'd like to show you something." He guided her to the memorial table. Mrs. Connie read the plaque with teary eyes. "He would be so happy to know this," she whispered. "And he'd be even happier to know that you are our guest today," Robert said. "Please, have a seat. I'll have them prepare our best menu for you." At that moment, Sarah walked by carrying documents for the Second Chance Fund. She saw the scene, understood immediately, and smiled. The lesson had been learned and was being passed on. Mrs. Connie had lunch that Sunday afternoon sitting at Mr. Arthur's table, treated with all the dignity and respect he had always championed. When she left, she carried not just the memory of a delicious meal, but the certainty that her friend's kindness lived on, echoing through every gesture, every smile, every act of generosity that happened in that special place. Robert watched her leave and then looked around his restaurant. The dining room was full, families laughing, couples celebrating, friends gathering. But more important than the bustle or the profit was the atmosphere. There was human warmth there. There was respect. There was a soul. He walked over to Mr. Arthur's photograph and lightly touched the glass of the frame. "We are honoring your legacy," he whispered. "Every day, in every gesture, we are proving you were right. True wealth is in what we give, not what we have." And in that moment, Robert was certain that Mr. Arthur, wherever he was smiling proudly. The cycle of generosity he had started 18 years ago kept turning, touching lives, transforming destinies, proving that a single decision to believe in someone can change not just one life, but the entire world around it. Hearth and Heritage continued to thrive, but now its measure of success wasn't just on the financial spreadsheets. It was in the young people receiving opportunities through the Second Chance Fund. It was in the vulnerable people who sat at the memorial table and regained their dignity. It was in the employees who worked with pride, knowing they were part of something bigger. It was in every customer who left not just well-fed, but touched by the humanity that permeated every corner of that special place. And all of this because one day, many years ago, a bus driver named Arthur decided that giving a dreamer a chance was worth more than a lifetime of savings. He didn't know it at the time, but that decision would plant a seed that would continue to bear fruit for generations, proving that the greatest legacy anyone can leave isn't measured in money or power, but in lives transformed and hearts touched. Sarah, now a respected leader and mentor to new entrepreneurs, frequently told the story to the fund's beneficiaries. She always ended with the words that became the unofficial motto of Hearth and Heritage: "A man's true value is in what he gives, not what he has." And each of you, by receiving this opportunity, is being invited to continue this cycle. One day, when you succeed, remember to reach out to another dreamer. That is the only payback that really matters. And so, Mr. Arthur's legacy lived on, not in marble monuments or gold plaques, but in something much more powerful, in lives transformed, in dreams realized, in opportunities given, in dignity restored, in humanity preserved. Because in the end, that is the only wealth that truly transcends time and death. The end. If the journey of Mr. Arthur, Robert, and Sarah touched your heart, know that we have many other moving stories to share. Each narrative is a window into values that transform lives: generosity, courage, empathy, and the certainty that our daily choices can create waves of change that go far beyond what we imagine. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these stories that celebrate the best of human nature. Leave a like if this story inspired you, and in the comments tell us, have you ever had the chance to give or receive a second chance that changed everything? Your story could inspire thousands of others. We are here, together, proving that kindness still moves the world.